Our story this morning is about someone who received a Valentine. I hope that you received a Valentine sometime in the past week or so, or will get one soon. We think we managed to send one to every member, child, and friend of the church. If we missed you, be in touch so that we can make sure you're on our list for next year. Mr. Hatch was tall and thin, and he did not smile. He went to work in a factory, and he ate his lunch alone. After work, he would make 2 stops, at the newsstand and at the grocery store. After supper, he went to bed early. He keeps to himself. That's what everyone said about Mr. Hatch. One Saturday, Mr. Hatch got a surprise, a package wrapped in brown paper. He had never spoken to the letter carrier before. "Thank you, Mr. Goober," he said. Mr. Hatch tore the brown paper off. Inside was a white box, which he opened to find another box. This one was heart-shaped, all satiny red with a pink bow on top. It was filled with candy. Something fluttered to the porch. It was a little white card. He picked it up. It said, "Somebody loves you." Only then did he remember that it was Valentine's Day. Mr. Hatch wondered and wondered. Now who would send this to me? He was all alone. He had no friends. And yet someone had sent him a Valentine. Who? Who? At last he exclaimed, "Why, I've got a secret admirer!" And then he did something he had never done before. He laughed. He laughed and danced and clapped his hands, and then he took a piece of candy from the box and he ate it. Mr. Hatch went for a walk. Maybe, he thought, I will meet the person who sent me the candy. Of course, no one had ever seen Mr. Hatch smiling, so he got a lot of attention. Mr. Hatch waved hello to everyone. On Monday at work, Mr. Hatch spoke to everyone and passed out chocolates from his heart box. On the way home, as usual, he stopped at the newsstand. Mr. Smith handed him the usual newspaper. "I think I'll have a pack of mints. And if you don't mind my saying so, Mr. Smith, you don't look very well today," said Mr. Hatch, not as usual. Mr. Smith allowed as how he was not feeling well and needed to go to the doctor. Mr. Hatch smiled. "Why, I'd be happy to watch the stand for you while you go." And so Mr. Hatch ran the newsstand for an hour. He wondered if any of the people who stopped to buy the paper, or a magazine, or a candy bar, had sent him the mysterious Valentine. After supper, Mr. Hatch decided it would be nice to have brownies to share the next day with the people at the shoelace factory. As he baked, the warm chocolate smell of brownies floated through the neighborhood. Children gathered round Mr. Hatch's house, sniffing the air. "Well, I suppose the factory can wait," said Mr. Hatch as he looked out the window. He stirred up a nice cold pitcher of lemonade, and the whole thing turned out to be a picnic in Mr. Hatch's backyard with music and dancing. And so the days and weeks went by. When Mr. Hatch wasn't smiling, he was laughing. And when he wasn't laughing, he was helping someone. And when he wasn't helping someone, he was having a party in his yard or on his porch. He seemed to have forgotten about finding the person who sent him the Valentine. Then one afternoon, Mr. Goober, the letter carrier, came to his door. His face was very serious. "I don't suppose you still have that package I brought you on Valentine's Day," said Mr. Goober sadly. "I'm afraid I delivered it to the wrong address. It was supposed to go to another house." Mr. Hatch recalled tearing off the brown paper. It had never occurred to him to go look for the address. He fetched the heart-shaped box and the pink bow and gave them to the letter carrier along with the little white card. Alone in his living room, Mr. Hatch sighed. Nobody loved me after all. Then he went to bed early. The next morning, Mr. Hatch went to work at the factory and he ate his lunch alone. He didn't speak to people or bake brownies or have picnics or parties anymore. Everyone whispered, "What's wrong with Mr. Hatch?" Mr. Goober, the letter carrier, told them. "We love Mr. Hatch," insisted his newfound friends. All the children in the neighborhood remembered Mr. Hatch's wonderful brownies and lemonade, and most of all, his laughter. "Poor Mr. Hatch," they said. "What can we do?" Then Mr. Goober announced, "I have an idea." On Saturday morning, Mr. Hatch woke to a bright and sunny day. When he went out to the porch with his dustpan and broom, he couldn't believe his eyes. This is what it looked like. The front yard was filled with people, happy, smiling people. They were holding up a huge sign with hand-painted letters. It said, "Everybody loves Mr. Hatch." I do believe Mr. Hatch sniffed. Somebody loves me after all. And then he smiled, and then he laughed, and then he hurried down to be with his friends.